Welcome to Saints Take 5, a true crime commentary channel. So if you follow true crime cases and you're looking for a place to hang out and continue the conversation about cases you're probably already familiar with, then this might be the place for you. Hit the subscribe button to increase the likelihood of my videos showing up on your homepage, and if you hit the bell in addition to the subscribe button, you will be notified every time I upload a video. On Staten Island, New York, in early September of 1975, 22-year-old Sylvia Lwowski returned home from a shopping trip with her best friend Lauren and hurried to get ready for her movie date with her fiancé. Frank picked her up from the home she shared with her parents Joe and Eva and her younger teenage brother Anthony. The couple drove to the Island Movie Theater in the Kmart shopping plaza off of Richmond Avenue, across from the Fresh Kills landfill and close to the Staten Island Mall. It was the Saturday after Labor Day weekend, but the mall was still packed with shoppers trying to find lingering deals and summer clearance sales. Richmond Avenue was a busy main road lined with businesses and bus stops. Sylvia was very familiar with the area. This would have been the second time in one day that she would be there. We don't know for sure which film the couple went to see, and for reasons unknown, Sylvia and Frank got into a huge argument after the movie. We don't know if it started in the theater, in the parking lot, or the car, but it seems like it escalated in the car to the point where Sylvia got so angry that she threw her prescription eyeglasses at the dashboard and exited the vehicle. She refused to get back in and made a comment about taking a bus instead and walked off. We don't know exactly where she left the vehicle. The police report said that she was last seen in the Kmart Plaza on Richmond Avenue, and her fiancé gave descriptions such as at an intersection, at a stop sign, and in a traffic jam. Unfortunately, I don't know what the area looked like in 1975 to be able to pinpoint her exact location or which direction she headed. Frank lost sight of her after she fled the vehicle. Apparently, Frank spent some time driving around the area looking for her, but there was no sign of her. Around 10:30 that night, Sylvia's best friend Lauren, the one she had spent the afternoon shopping with, was at her house sitting on her porch with friends when Frank's car pulled up. Lauren approached the car and could immediately see that Frank was angry. He told her that he and Sylvia got into a fight after their movie date, and Sylvia got out of the car, stating that she'd get a bus instead, walked off, and he couldn't find her. He asked if Lauren could go pick her up, and then drove off. Despite having her own car, as a young lady in the 1970s, Lauren was not allowed to drive around at night, so she said goodnight to her friends and asked her father to drive her to go look for Sylvia. They drove up and down Richmond Avenue, checking the bus stops, and they drove through the parking lots of the shopping centers and checked payphone areas. But when they did not see Sylvia, they assumed that she had gotten on the bus and they had just missed her. Lauren called Sylvia's house when she got home, but Miss Eva said Sylvia wasn't home yet. Lauren asked if Miss Eva could have Sylvia call her when she got in, which Lauren assumed would be any minute, and added that she had something personal and important to tell her, so Miss Eva would make an exception to the rule that the girls weren't allowed to make phone calls past 10 p.m. Miss Eva agreed, but when Lauren didn't hear from Sylvia, she went to bed assuming Sylvia was pretty upset and tired and would probably just fill her in on what happened tomorrow. Sometime after Sylvia's fiancé left her friend Lauren's house, he went to Sylvia's house to inform the Lwowskis. From what Sylvia's brother can recall, and he was only 16 at the time, Frank came to the door and told the family about the fight, how Sylvia had thrown her glasses at the dashboard, and how she exited the vehicle and ran off. Frank couldn't find her. Anthony couldn't believe what he was hearing. His big sister was missing. Sylvia Lwowski never came home that night. That shocked teenage boy from 1975 is now a grown man in his 60s, still hoping someone out there can help him find Sylvia. He has spent 50 years and over $60,000 searching for his big sister. Young ladies don't just disappear into a magical mist or fall into a troll hole somewhere. Maybe you are the one person out there that can help us find Sylvia Alice Lwowski.
You know it, the Lord. You know it, for Sunday. You know it, the Lord. You know it, for Sunday. You know it, the Lord. You know it, for Sunday. You know it, the Lord. You know it, for Sunday.
Welcome to part 7 of my Sylvia Lwowski series. If you are just joining us, I highly recommend that you go back and watch previous parts in the series to get caught up. When Sylvia disappeared back in 1975, the police handled the situation as a voluntarily missing person. So from my understanding, there was no real investigation into her case. I don't even think it was a case. On the police report, Miss Eva requested no media attention. According to Sylvia's friends and family, they think that Miss Eva truly believed for a while there that Sylvia was just taking some time to herself, likely hiding out at a friend's house and would resurface when she was ready. It sounded like Miss Eva didn't want to draw attention to the drama and run the risk of embarrassing Sylvia or possibly damaging the reputation of a young lady that had just recently graduated college, was on her way to the altar, and just beginning to explore job opportunities. I can see why Miss Eva did that. Unfortunately, the lack of media attention probably hurt the case as well. So here I am trying to make up for lost time, and I really appreciate those of you taking time out of your day to pay attention too. So let's continue. The voluntary missing theory has been the most prevalent theory for the past 5 decades. But after discovering that no one has seen or heard from her in all this time, combined with the U.S. government's complete inability to locate her through official legal documents, I started highly doubting that Sylvia was out there somewhere living a new life. At some point in that 50-year period, someone had to be thinking, wait a minute, something isn't right here. Maybe this young lady is in real danger. And although I remain hopeful that Sylvia is alive and well and thriving in her 70s now, I think the most likely reason for her absence is that she is deceased, and likely has been since the night she disappeared. Therefore, my past several videos have been exploring the 5 manners of death: natural, accidental, suicide, homicide, and undetermined. In my other videos, we discussed the first 3, so today we're going to consider the 4th, homicide. First, I want to explore the possibility that a stranger attacked Sylvia and ended her life. I think this is probably the least likely of the homicide perpetrators, but I still want to consider it. Let's start with serial killers. Now, I can hear your eyes rolling from here, and I don't blame you. So many true crime stories revolve around serial killers that people often think they're more common than they actually are. Serial killers are an extremely rare breed of human, especially in the categories we as the public typically think of them. I can't really speak for you, but for me personally, I always defined a serial killer as like a usually lone wolf male that targets strangers of a certain preference and kills them for pleasure. They tend to have some sort of primal drive to do this, and they will go hunting, if you want to call it that, in periodic spurts followed by cooling off periods. Now, this is obviously my very unprofessional, loose personal definition because I know tons of cases where instead of a male, the offender is a female, and instead of a lone wolf, it's 2 guys that met in prison teaming up to do a crime together. Or while most of the victims are strangers, early on the offender may have gone after people known to him. Sometimes the offender doesn't have a particular victim preference, or if they typically do, they may have strayed from that out of opportunity. Sometimes the pleasure aspect is sexual, or for power, or deep anger. Sometimes all of the above. Sometimes they don't hunt in spurts, and sometimes they don't have cooling off periods. It's a little murky, but I would guess that a lot of you will still understand what I'm saying and probably hold a very similar definition in your minds. I wanted to see how my personal definition compared with an official or expert's definition of serial killer. I was looking at an interesting document created based on Radford University and Florida Gulf Coast University's collaboration, where they created a serial killer database consisting of 4,743 caught or known confirmed serial killers and 13,105 victims. I'll put the source info on the screen for you to screenshot if you want to dig deeper into it, but I was just briefly scrolling through it, and according to the FBI's definition of serial killer, given at the 2005 San Antonio Symposium, they say a serial killer or killing is, quote, the unlawful killing of two or more victims by the same offender or offenders in separate events. Now, over the years, I have seen other definitions similar to that. Some say the offender or offenders would have to target two or more victims, while others say three, but this one just says more than two victims. Either way, that's an incredibly broad definition, isn't it? A serial killer is anyone that kills more than two victims on multiple occasions. I feel like that encompasses so many types of offenders that I wouldn't have thought to label as serial killers. My personal definition certainly falls under that umbrella, but then that means I'm thinking of a particular type of offender or small cluster of offenders under that blanket definition. And since I'm going on the assumption that you guys are probably defining a serial killer in a very similar way, and I'm assuming that you guys have already heard that serial killers are rare, this really helps to put it into perspective how rare. Because if anyone that kills more than two people on multiple occasions is a serial killer, and serial killers are rare, that means the kind we're thinking about are even rarer. Page 11 of the same document is titled Broad Motives and lists a few given explanations for why these offenders did what they did. Now, I don't know if these motives are self-reported by the offenders or if the police or psychologists determine the motive. I'm not really sure. But the first motive on the list is enjoyment, which probably doesn't surprise you guys because it probably aligns with what you already know about serial killers. Our public understanding is a person that enjoys doing this to people. It's like his favorite hobby. Number two kind of surprised me: financial gain. I have certainly heard of my definition of serial killer taking items from their victims, sometimes as trophies, or sometimes they do rob the victim for financial gain, but it's kind of a satellite crime. After the victim is deceased, they'll go through the victim's pockets and steal money or take valuables from the victim's home. As I read this paper, I thought, are the experts defining a robber that kills more than two of his victims on separate occasions as a serial killer? I personally have never thought of it that way. I would just refer to a robber that ends the life of his victims as a robber that murders or a robber slash murderer. I never thought to call those types a serial killer, but technically, yes, they are. But serial killers are rare, and that's a serial killer. So the type of guy we're thinking about is super duper rare. The third motive on the list is anger, which is in line with my personal definition, and number four is listed as multiple motives. I think most of our personal definitions encompass enjoyment and anger. We hear about a lot of serial killers that enjoy killing what infuriates them. Women, for example. They like to have power over and control women because they have intense hatred and anger towards them. I was really surprised by number 5 and number 7, gang activity and cults. I personally never really thought of those as serial killings. I always assumed those were more about a groupthink dynamic and a hierarchy where the upper echelon orders lower ranking members to carry out crimes. I'm not saying the lower ranking members aren't responsible for their crimes, they certainly are. But there's a loyalty and survival component there, a sense of abuse in a way, depending on how you look at it. Then the more I thought about it, cult leaders, serial killers like Charles Manson came to mind. And then I thought about various things I've heard about old mobster stories, where mob guys admitted that certain guys in their ranks were particularly brutal, almost as if they would have been a serial killer whether they were in the mob or not, because the guy seemed to enjoy killing in a way that made the other guys cringe. Perhaps that's what the experts are referring to. The number 6 motive was avoiding arrest, and number 8 was convenience. Again, I always saw these as satellite crimes the serial killer commits to get away with or help him achieve the main motive. But as the main motive? So that was interesting too. Number 9 on the list is hallucinations, and I'm wondering if that encompasses both hallucinations from mental illness and substance induced. This topic reminds me of the serial killer that claimed he attacked people because his dog told him to do it. Last on the list of motives is attention, and people like Zodiac come to mind when I hear that. He was writing coded letters to the cops and media and adopted a sensational superhero type of persona and name. Very attention seeking. Well, thanks for hanging out with me while I rambled and scratched my head with that one, but it makes total sense to me now. It's interesting to me how this information simultaneously expanded the definition of serial killer for me, but also just shrunk my already rare character in my mind to a teeny tiny minuscule blip in the universe. The serial killer database that Radford and Florida Gulf Coast universities created only had 4,743 serial killers in it as of 2016, but that data was compiled over several decades, and there's 300 million people in the country. Very rare indeed. But it's also concerning that those 4,743 offenders ended the lives of over 13,000 people, at least of the ones discovered. And even though 13,000 is a small number in comparison to the total population, one murder victim is too much. For sake of argument, we're not going to get too granular or abide by true definitions as we go on. We're just going to kick around the ideas as the unprofessionals that we are, and we could use some of those motives that were mentioned as a source of exploration. So, could Sylvia have run into a serial killer on her way to a bus stop on Richmond Avenue that evening? Anything is possible, but is it probable? I would think that her chances of being the victim of a serial killer would be more unlikely than some of, and maybe all of, the previously discussed manners of death. I feel like natural causes, accidental causes, and suicide would all be far more likely than a serial killer. I also wonder, though, because I would assume her body would have been found by now, if it was suicide, natural, or accidental death. Many serial killers do not hide bodies because the victim is a stranger. In other words, there's nothing to connect the people to each other, so they usually don't bother hiding it, or they make minimal efforts. But some serial killers do hide them, and very well. Homicide is a very likely reason as to why we haven't found her remains. Perhaps this disappearance has been a mystery for 50 years because we're quick to dismiss the possibility of a serial killer. So I think it's worth talking about at the very least. A quick little Google search, AI overview response, told me that back in the 1970s, there were approximately 300 active serial killers in the country. 300. Now that was just an estimate, and this was during the largest spike we've ever seen. Today, there are far, far less of them. 300 seems like a lot, but that's still a tiny drop of individuals compared to the population. One of those deranged individuals would have to have been on Staten Island on Saturday, September 6, 1975, between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. in the Kmart Plaza area, and would have had to have seen Sylvia. Then he would have to be untethered to any responsibilities, such as work, a party, a class, or whatever, to have time and be unburdened by other people, like his wife, kids, parents, sibling, coworker, friend, or whoever else might stand in the way of him carrying out his crime. Then he'd have to find a way to either abduct or lure her to a place of his choosing, and have the weapon of his choice available. I think you get the picture. So many factors would have to align perfectly for him to strike, and to strike her, of all people. So I wondered, were there any active serial killers in the area during September 1975? A serial killer named Richard Biggenwald was born in 1940 and grew up on Staten Island. His father was a violent alcoholic, so it sounds like his home life was a nightmare. At age 5, Richard set the family home on fire, and at age 11, he set himself on fire. These incidents, combined with a myriad of disturbing behaviors, put him in and out of psychiatric hospitals for a good chunk of his childhood. At 15, he left a home for troubled youth and went to Nashville. In 1958, he was 18 and living in New Jersey when he and a friend tried to rob a local deli, and the owner, Sylvia Lwowski, was shot dead. Richard was caught and went to prison. So Sylvia was born around the time of this murder, and Richard stayed in the prison for the majority of Sylvia's life. Richard Biggenwald was released from prison in 1975, the same year Sylvia went missing, but I couldn't find an exact date of his release. One source said that he was released in 1974, but an exact date wasn't given. Obviously, if Richard was released prior to September 6, 1975, then we should take a closer look at him. But if he wasn't released until after Sylvia went missing, then we can rule him out. When Richard was released from prison, he was either living with or spending a lot of time at his mother's house on Staten Island. And wait, let me staple my skin down so it doesn't crawl off my body. Okay, so Richard develops a crush on and pursues a 16-year-old little girl in his mother's neighborhood. He's almost 30 years old, just got out of jail, chasing children. Yuck. A relationship blossoms, although I would call it more of a grooming scenario. But regardless, she was probably the best thing to ever happen to this guy. Richard was out of jail, got a job, and I think his father was out of the picture at this time, and he was consumed with romance. So I don't know if this was the case, but often when a serial killer is experiencing good life events, their crimes tend to de-escalate, and when they go through stressful times, their crimes amp up. I guess I'm hoping that Biggenwald was behaving and spending most of his time with his love interest instead of hurting people. So as far as we know, he was busy being in love in 1975 when Sylvia went missing. As far as I know, he didn't have any other victims until 1978, when he shot and killed another man, John Patrone, in New Jersey. In 1980, he married that young girl, and they lived in New Jersey where all of his murders took place. There was a woman that accused him of SA in 1980, but she couldn't identify him in a lineup, so he was never convicted of that. It seems he started attacking women a year later in 1981. Most of the females were 17 years old, and they were shot in the head. Some of the women's bodies were buried in his mother's basement on Staten Island. Some were kept in his garage in his New Jersey home, and some were left in public areas not well hidden. In 1982, the remains of 18-year-old Anna, I meant to look up her last name. I can't even say her last name. Olis, I'm not even going to try, you guys. It's hard. Okay, well, Anna was found behind a fast food restaurant. The news reported that she was last seen at a boardwalk Labor Day weekend. One of Biggenwald's wife's friends went to police about Richard when she heard that. She said she had been a witness to him looking for women at that same boardwalk. He showed her a woman's body in his garage, and he even gave her a piece of jewelry that had belonged to one of the victims. The police arrested Biggenwald and searched his home. One of his friends was there at the time, and he told police about all the times he had helped Richard transport and dispose of bodies. The friend actually dug some of the holes in Richard's mother's basement. While digging a grave for one victim, he discovered the remains of another one. Thankfully, Richard was taken off the streets in 1983, and he died in prison of natural causes in 2008. Could Richard Biggenwald be responsible for Sylvia's disappearance? Well, that would depend on his exact release date from prison. Since we don't know that, let's consider other aspects about him. Richard certainly knew his targeted age group well, pinpointing 17-year-olds almost exclusively. Sylvia was older at 22 and likely had a more mature college girl demeanor about her. Since Richard liked the teenage girls, he likely trolled areas teenage girls hung out, such as the shopping malls, which was where Sylvia was walking that night. The Staten Island Mall was built during Biggenwald's imprisonment, so I'm sure he went to check it out at some point after his release. He had a history of picking up young girls walking on the side of the road and offering them substances to lure them in his vehicle. Sylvia's victimology tells us that she would be very unlikely to accept a ride from this strange older man, especially if he were offering illegal substances. I wonder, though, if she would let her guard down if the car was full of teenage girls and no substances offered. The thing is, Biggenwald often enlisted the help of other people in his crimes and openly showed bodies to them. These people told police everything they knew, but they never mentioned Sylvia. The police dug up and searched Richard's mom's basement and yard. No Sylvia. Once arrested, he admitted some of his crimes and confessed his motives. Sylvia was never mentioned. Although his mom lived on Staten Island, all of his victims were taken from and or killed in New Jersey, so he didn't seem to be committing the crimes close to mom, but just hiding them there. This guy was definitely an extremely angry, violent individual, a guy that seemed to aim to check off every crime on his list: arson, car theft, burglary, robbery, murder, SA, child abuse, kidnapping, drugs, you name it. There's no evidence that he knew Sylvia or encountered her, and the chances of those two colliding aren't impossible, but very slim. And even though he's a loose cannon, there's still a lot of predictable aspects of his behavior, and he's so braggy. Want to see what I got in my garage? What a moron. I think Biggenwald could remain a last resort in the pile of possibilities, but I'd say the odds are still astronomical. Another name I have heard in relation to Sylvia is Andre Rand, a convicted killer nicknamed the Pied Piper of Staten Island. I didn't have to read too far into this guy to rule him out. He's portrayed as a creepy, disheveled dude that camps out in the woods and gets around town on a woman's bicycle with one of those ET baskets on the front of it. He worked at the Willowbrook place that everyone talks about around Halloween because it's a spooky, abandoned psychiatric facility with a dark history. I'm sure he fit right in. It's abundantly clear that Andre Rand targeted children. In 1969, he got arrested for abducting and attempting to essay a 9-year-old girl. A police officer driving past an empty lot saw the two naked from afar and decided to investigate. Andre only served about a year and a half of his 4-year sentence for that. He got out of prison in 1972. That same year, a little girl named Alice, age 6, went missing from her apartment building's lobby while playing with her brother. Andre was doing work around that building at the time, and a witness claimed that the child walked off with Andre. In 1981, he used a lollipop to try to lure a 9-year-old girl into his vehicle. She declined and ran home while he apparently followed her. No charges were filed against him in Alice's case or the lollipop girl. In 1983, Andre really went bonkers by abducting 11 kids from a YMCA for 5 hours. He got them fast food and took them on a little field trip to a local airport. Apparently, the kids had a great time, unaware of the danger of the situation. Andre got less than a year in prison for that. Another incident in 1983 involving a 10-year-old girl that vanished on her way to a neighborhood shop for chicken wings put Andre on the radar again since he had his camp nearby. Police didn't have enough evidence to go after him. It's weird because whenever I heard his name, he was labeled as a serial killer, but I didn't see much evidence of that. But then again, I didn't do much of a deep dive on him because I wanted to stay within the scope of Sylvia's case. But he obviously has impulse control issues and is clearly a predator. But he has a strong preference for little kids, not 22-year-old women like Sylvia. With guys like him, it's like boobies are gross, you know? You know what I mean? So there was an incident where two teenage girls accused him of SA in 1 year. I don't know if those were two separate incidents or if the girls were friends and they were together at the time, but no charges were filed, so I'm not sure if that was even true. I personally would rule Andre out because of his victim preferences, lack of evidence that Sylvia ever encountered this guy, and the astronomical chances of her being one of his victims. Richard Biggenwald and Andre Rand are the only two serial killers that I'd like to explore, but if you guys can think of one that operated on Staten Island in 1975 and want to share information in the comments section, please feel free to do so. Tell us why you think the monster you found deserves a consideration in Sylvia's disappearance. I'm personally going to rule out that a serial killer is responsible for her demise. It's just so unlikely. But like I said, we can keep it as a last resort card. Keeping with our theme of homicide, let's consider the possibility that a violent, non serial killer stranger is responsible for Sylvia's disappearance. The FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program, or UCR program, strives to collect statistical data from law enforcement agencies in relation to homicides. In 2017, they received data on 15,129 victims of homicide from that year. I know that Sylvia's case happened in 1975, but I wanted to get a glimpse on the relationship between offenders and their victims. So some of this 2017 information was interesting to me. Unfortunately, in 50% of the cases that they reviewed, there wasn't any information on the offender-victim relationship. But of the cases where those details were provided, 28% of the homicide victims were killed by someone they knew. But that 28% does not include family members. The 28% is people like friends, unmarried partners, neighbors, coworkers, and acquaintances. 12.3% of the homicide victims were killed by family members. 9.7% were killed by strangers. Over the years of me randomly looking up similar information, I found that this data aligns with other data I've seen. The numbers can fluctuate a bit, but generally victims killed by strangers is always the lowest percentage. According to an article from psychologytoday.com titled "The Truth About Stranger Homicide and Who's Really at Risk," stranger homicides are incredibly rare, and when they happen, men are typically the offenders and the victims. Women are rarely the victims of stranger homicide. They are far more likely to be killed by family, partners, and friends. Sylvia was very unlikely to be killed by a stranger, if homicide was the reason for her disappearance. One thing that I would be a little concerned about is that Sylvia is walking around in a blind rage, literally, since she wasn't wearing her glasses. She sounds furious and so overcome with emotion that she wasn't able to stop and think of consequences. She threw her glasses without stopping to think, wait a minute, those are expensive. I need them to see. And she's not pausing to think, wait a minute, my fiancé is getting on my nerves, but come on, he's my ride home. Now I have to walk around alone. So, how might a young lady in a fury be perceived on the street? What if she was so distracted with her emotions and drama that she accidentally plowed into a stranger with their baby, a wedding cake, or their own anger issues, knocking them off the sidewalk into the street or something? Could that stranger have attacked her? Or what if she was so angry that when a stranger spoke to her, she screamed at them and they snapped? It's possible, but incredibly improbable, that the stranger would respond to these things by killing her. That's pretty extreme. I would imagine that after removing herself from Frank in his car, that she would have felt some relief and calmed down the further she walked. But I don't know. I would think that if a stranger intended on hurting Sylvia, they would try to abduct her and take her to a private place. But that sounds like something a serial killer would do. If a stranger attacked her where she stood, someone would have likely witnessed the attack, heard screaming, or would have found an injured or dying woman nearby. I was curious, so I found some information about body disposal on crimesceneinvestigator.net, where they reviewed 840 cases. In homicides where the offender was a stranger to the victim, 72% of the victims' bodies were unconcealed, meaning the perpetrator made no effort to hide the body. 43% of victims killed by friends or acquaintances were unconcealed. 39% of victims killed by family were unconcealed. And only 17% of victims killed by intimate partners are unconcealed. The article also said that in a stranger homicide, 61% of the victims are discovered by bystanders. Since the bodies are often just left there, and about half of the victims are found within 2 days, they're found very quickly. Across the board, it seems highly unlikely that Sylvia was killed by a stranger. Serial killers are extremely rare. Stranger on stranger homicides are rare, especially for females. Her body has been missing for half a century, but most bodies of stranger victims are unconcealed and found by a bystander within a few days. Therefore, under the umbrella of homicide, I would eliminate the probability of Sylvia being the victim of stranger homicide. So, what are you guys thinking? Are you thinking this is unlikely as well, or do you disagree? Please share your thoughts in the comment section. In my next video, we're going to continue to explore homicide as a possible explanation for Sylvia's disappearance. We're going to consider the possibility that Sylvia was killed by someone she knew. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you for part 8.